Part 1: How the Battle of the Somme began. The Battle of the Somme was one of the bloodiest battles of the First World War. From July to November 1916, millions of soldiers fought through deep mud while enduring relentless artillery bombardments and deadly machine gun fire. Over time, the Somme became a symbol of the terrible cost and apparent futility of trench warfare. It also remains one of the most debated battles in military history, with historians still asking a key question: who really won the Battle of the Somme? By the end of 1915, the Allied powers knew they needed a new strategy. The Central Powers had inflicted devastating defeats on the Russian army, conquered Serbia, stopped Italy's offensives, repelled the Gallipoli landings, and halted French attacks on the Western Front. To regain the initiative, the Allies planned a series of massive offensives for the summer of 1916 on the Eastern Front, in Italy, and along the Western Front. French Commander-in-Chief Joseph Joffre selected the Somme River as the location for the main Western Front offensive because it was where the British and French armies met. Since France had a much larger army than Britain at the time, the French were originally expected to carry the main burden of the attack. Everything changed in February 1916 when Germany launched its massive assault on Verdun. Although the French successfully defended the city, they suffered enormous casualties. As a result, the largely inexperienced British Army was forced to assume the leading role in the Somme offensive. Even the overall objective of the operation remained unclear. Some commanders hoped to break through the German defensive lines, while others believed the main purpose was simply to relieve the pressure on Verdun. General Douglas Haig later claimed that his true objective had been to wear down the German army through continuous fighting, but historians continue to debate whether that was really the original plan. General Henry Rawlinson, commander of the British Fourth Army, favored a cautious approach. He wanted to advance in short stages, forcing the Germans to launch costly counterattacks. Meanwhile, French General Marie Fayolle expressed frustration over the lack of a clear strategic goal, arguing that weakening the enemy alone was not enough justification for such a massive battle. Tensions also grew between the British and French leadership. General Philippe Pétain, who commanded at Verdun, demanded that Britain launch the offensive as soon as possible. The British government worried that France was sacrificing too many soldiers, while many French officers believed Britain lacked the determination to fight with the same intensity. Despite these disagreements, the Allies agreed on one crucial lesson. The failed offensives of 1915 had proven that infantry attacks without overwhelming artillery support were doomed to fail. This time, they planned to destroy the German defenses with an unprecedented artillery bombardment before sending the infantry across no man's land, hoping to advance with far fewer casualties. RT2, preparing for the Great Offensive. While the Allies finalized their plans, the German army had already built one of the strongest defensive systems on the Western Front. Since occupying the high ground in 1914, German engineers had spent nearly 2 years strengthening their positions around the Somme. They constructed 2 main defensive lines and began building a third behind them. Deep underground bunkers, some reaching nearly 12 meters below the surface, protected soldiers from almost every artillery shell except the heaviest ones. Thick belts of barbed wire, in some places up to 9 meters wide, covered the front of the trenches, while fortified villages and powerful strongpoints formed an interconnected network of defenses. General Fritz von Below, commander of the German Second Army, ordered his troops to defend every meter of ground and immediately counterattack any trench that fell into Allied hands. His strategy left no room for retreat. Although the German defenses were formidable, they were not without weaknesses. Allied artillery observers could clearly see many of the frontline trenches, and a large number of German soldiers remained stationed in these exposed positions instead of staying safely inside their deep bunkers. The Allies believed that a massive artillery bombardment would destroy the enemy's defenses before the infantry advanced. On June 24, 1916, the largest artillery barrage ever seen began. During the first week alone, more than 2 million shells were fired at German positions. For many German soldiers, the bombardment was unlike anything they had ever experienced. The endless explosions shook the earth day and night, destroying trenches and putting enormous psychological pressure on everyone trapped inside the defensive lines. On paper, the Allies held a significant advantage. Britain deployed 26 divisions supported by more than 1,300 artillery guns, while France committed 12 divisions with approximately 1,400 guns and hundreds of aircraft. Facing them were only 8 German divisions, supported by fewer guns and aircraft. The overwhelming Allied firepower convinced many British soldiers that the German trenches would be completely destroyed before the attack began. Some even believed they would simply walk into abandoned enemy positions without serious resistance. Others were far less confident. Many young soldiers preparing for their very first battle were overwhelmed with fear. Captain Charles May wrote an emotional letter to his wife, confessing that he feared he would never see her or their young daughter again. If he were killed, he wanted them to remember that they had always been the center of his life. As dawn approached on July 1, 1916, thousands of British soldiers waited nervously inside their trenches, unaware that they were about to face one of the deadliest days in British military history. Part 4: The battle continues. Although the first day ended in disaster for Britain, the battle was far from over. The German army had successfully defended most of its positions, but its commanders realized that the Allies possessed far greater numbers of men, artillery, and ammunition than they had expected. On July 3, 1916, General Fritz von Below issued a strict order to every unit under his command. He declared that the outcome of the Battle of the Somme could decide the fate of the entire war. Every trench had to be held at all costs, and no position was to be abandoned voluntarily. According to his orders, the enemy would advance only over the bodies of German soldiers. Meanwhile, British commander Douglas Haig briefly considered ending the offensive and launching a new attack in Flanders instead. The proposal alarmed the French leadership, who feared that Britain was losing its determination. During a tense meeting, French commander Joseph Joffre insisted that the offensive must continue, arguing that France desperately needed British support while the fighting at Verdun continued. As a result, the Allies prepared another major assault. On July 14, the British attacked once again. This time, the offensive was far better organized. A short but extremely intense artillery bombardment, followed by a carefully coordinated creeping barrage, allowed British troops to capture most of the German second defensive line. For the first time during the battle, small groups of British cavalry even moved forward near High Wood, hoping to exploit a breakthrough. However, determined German resistance soon forced them to withdraw. During the following weeks, the Battle of the Somme turned into a series of brutal local attacks. Instead of one decisive breakthrough, both sides fought fiercely for individual villages, forests, and trench systems. Every captured position was immediately challenged by German counterattacks, and every small gain came at an enormous cost. Elsewhere in Europe, the situation also influenced the battle. Russian offensives in the east, Italian attacks in the Alps, and the entry of Romania into the war placed increasing pressure on the Central Powers. Allied leaders hoped that Germany would eventually be overwhelmed by fighting on multiple fronts. Despite this optimism, progress along the Somme remained painfully slow. The British artillery inflicted terrible damage on German positions day after day. One German soldier described the constant bombardment. "The artillery destroys not only the ground around us but also our nerves. Day and night the shells never stop. I honestly do not know how much longer we can survive this."